Hey guys, Israel here, and today we are going to be building a .NET 6 REST API using C# obviously. We are also going to be using Entity Framework with the SQL database that we are going to be creating for this project, so let's not waste any more time and let's dive right into the code. And if you guys find this video helpful, I'd appreciate it guys if you hit the like button and you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any more content. So now that we're in Visual Studio, let's create our project. So you're going to want to make a .NET Core web API. You're going to be able to pick the framework that you want. It does not have to be .NET Core because we are obviously doing .NET 6. So this is the one you want, web API. Click it. We're just going to be doing test API YT for YouTube. Yes, that is the correct path. We're going to do .NET 6, obviously. That is the video that we're doing. And then everything else I think here can just stay the same. Create our project. Now that we have our API created, what we're going to do is we're going to do just a customer API just for getting, storing, editing, deleting, just regular CRUD operations on a list of customers, which we are going to store in a database. So I'm going to go do the database first, create it manually. That's the way I like to do it. I like to go database first, or reverse engineering as it's called now. Other people like to go code first, but that's on them. But for this video, I'm going to do it the way that I like to do it. So we're going to do database first. So I'm going to get rid of the sample stuff, and then we will move on with the project. Okay, now that I deleted some of the sample stuff, I'm going to go ahead and create my folder for my interfaces, my controllers, models, repository, and just have the whole repository pattern kind of folder set up for the project. Okay, so now that I created my folders, you see here I have my controller, data, interfaces, repository, and my model, all folders. Now I'm going to just create my model so you guys can see that I'm only going to have one model, and then I'm going to go into my new database that I'm going to go create now in SSMS. And we're going to create that database, have our one table, and then we can scaffold that and then come back to the code. So the one model that we are going to have a customers model. So our customer is only going to have two things in them. It's just going to be a customer ID and a customer name. That's all our customer is going to have. Nothing crazy. That's all we're gonna have. So we just need to be able to have some place that we can store and then go ahead and retrieve customers from. So we need to go create something like this in our database, and then we can scaffold our DB context and scaffold everything we're gonna need for our kind of repository pattern from there. So now let's move over to that. Okay, so now I'm here at Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio, SSMS. Is the short way of saying it. So we're gonna go right ahead, just create a new database. Database is just gonna be sample DB. It's not gonna be anything crazy. We're gonna be okay. We're just gonna create it. Should appear here under some other ones that I have. So what we're gonna do here is we now need to add a new table. So here we're just gonna need two things. What did our customer need? Our customer needed a customer ID and a customer name. So this is going to be the ID column of this. This is going to be the second thing, and that's all we're going to have in this whole thing. Int customer name. So this can be, I don't know, varchar 50. Seems fine. So you don't want to allow nulls here, and then you set that as the primary key, and we go down here. We need to specify that this is the ID and that we wanted to increment by 1 automatically in SQL. So cool, let's save it. That's going to be our customer table. If we open this up, now that we've saved it, we'll be able to see that we have a customer table here. And now that we have that, we have our database, we have our table. Now let's scaffold this sample DB database and this customer table into our DB context in our application so that we can start making the connection. So let's scaffold that in, and I'll show you guys how to do that. Now that we've created our database, we now have to figure out how to scaffold our database context into our project so that we can have, our database context that contains our one table that is the customers table that we created. As you guys saw, when it is right here. You guys can see we created this customer table, so we need to scaffold that in somehow. How do we do that? Well, we do it with this exact command right here. If you guys can see, it's .NET ef dbcontext scaffold your connection string to your database, Microsoft Entity Framework Core.SQL Server, and then a -o for the output directory of where you're gonna send this. I'm sending it to the model folder. Earlier we created this customer. We're gonna override it with the one that is gonna be generated along with the DB context. Along with the DB context come models based on all the tables. Like you could create, but this, entity framework is gonna take care of it. And then you have this -- force, which means that if I had changes in the future that I go and make to like the customer table, it will overwrite the customer file without throwing an error that the file already exists. As you can see over here, I was doing it and it said customer already exists. I can't rewrite it. Use the force flag. So that's what that's for. But to do this correctly, you need to install a few packages. So I'll show you which ones I have right here. You are going to need to have Entity Framework, obviously. Obviously, all these are going to be in version 6. Entity Framework Core, Entity Framework Core Design, and Entity Framework SQL Server. You're going to need these 4 so you can do all of this stuff. But once you do, you can run this and it's going to scaffold the DB context and overwrite the customer model. You can see our context just appeared. Let's go through it. Sample DB context based on our sample DB constructor. We have our one customers table with DB set, and then the actual kind of how the model looks, how the model's created within Entity Framework. And then our customer did not change at all. What it was, customer ID, customer name. So now let's use this, inject into our controller, start making our CRUD operations, and go from there. What comes next is we're going to create our customer controller. So let's start creating those endpoints. So let's create our controller. Now that we have our customer controller created, let's set it up with the proper things. So since it is an API controller, we want our controller base. We want to decorate it with API controller. We want to set the proper route that we're going to have to be our controller name. Once we have that, we will need a constructor. So let's go ahead and create that. Now that we have that, let's start with our first endpoint. And first endpoint is going to be HTTP GET, as the helpful suggestion is telling me. So HTTP GET is going to be the first one. This is going to be a public async. We're going to be returning a task of iAction result to the front end. It's just going to be a get. This is going to get all the customers in our database. We have our result. And we are not going to have a customer repository. So this is going to be giving an error, but we'll deal with that in a little bit. If I could spell correctly. There we go. And we're going to return. Okay. Result. Thank you for helping me out. And we're going to do the same thing when it comes to post, put, and delete. So I'm just going to copy the methods over since I already have them, just to not waste too much time. Same thing. We're going to have our HTTP post. We're going to bring in our customer model, but actually we can use this using statement, but with the new C# and stuff like that and .NET, we can just move this to our program and just do a global, do global using. So I'm just going to do that. I find it that it's just kind of nice. We have that. So now models is everywhere on the project. So I will not have to specify in every single file model. It just knows. But with those changes, just having that global using over there, nothing's going to change. And we're always going to use those models. And I really like this feature from the new things. It just gets rid of those, I don't know, top 10 lines, 15. When you get a lot of stuff going on in a project in a controller, having those using statements on every single controller, this is just so nice having them here. And then we're going to create our customer repository in a second. And that's going to be the next thing we actually go. So I'm going to just have them and add them into our project because we are going to need them. Even though they are not created yet, they will be created in a second. We are going to go ahead and have that here. Let's add this in because we are doing the repository pattern for this API as well. So once we get the customer repository going, we're going to have all that set up. So next thing we're going to need to do here though is create our interface and create our repository for the customer repository. So let's go ahead and do that. In the customer repository, we're going to have the 4 endpoints, the get, post, the put, and the delete. So let's get those endpoints in here. This one should actually also be async. Let me put that around here. So these are going to be the 4 methods that we are going to be creating in our repository. So now let's go to our actual repository and let's create that now. So we're going to create a new class, but it's going to be our customer repository, since that's what we need in every single one of our other files. Now we just have to create the actual methods and what they're actually going to do. So first one we're going to do, once we actually, import our, we're going to need a constructor first of all. Once we have our constructor, we are going to need to import our DB context that we're going to be using. So our DB context is going to be our sample DB context. Now that that is in, we need, the version of it as a variable. So our read only sample DB context. I really love the auto completion on this. It is actually beautiful. I love it so much. It's so helpful and it's so fast with 2022. So now the next thing we're going to do is we are going to do the get method. Close this. We're going to do the get method. Get method is going to be very simple. It's public we're going to return a list of customer, and it's just going to be a get. And on get, we're going to get a var result, await, and it's going to be to list async. I believe we're going to have to probably import something for this. Yes, I think Entity Framework Core. And now that we retrieved that, we are just going to then return that result. And that is all we need for that. That is our get method. So now let's move on to our post. Post is going to be extremely similar, a little bit different, but it is just as fine. Let me add a public async. We're returning an int, which is going to be the ID of what we just create. And then this is going to be, we are going to take the customer that we are passing in here. This is going to be the new customer that we are trying to create. And with that, we're just going to do dbcontext dot add. Thank you for the assist. We're not going to be returning just yet, so we just await this. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to return the customer ID that we just newly created. So now this is what we're returning. This is all good now. So now let's move on to our put. We know a put is really just, a get and then a post again, basically. So we are going to just do that all in one. So dbcontext.customer. It's going to be .where. The customer ID equals the customer.customer ID of what we have. And then you're going to return first your default async. And we're going to await this to make sure that it comes back correctly. And then once we get that, all we're going to do is we're just going to set the customer name to whatever new things. And that's probably the only thing you can really edit here. We're going to do that. And we're going to set the customer name to something new or whatever changed. And now you do await dbcontext dot save changes. Now that we have this, and then we just return again. Now we're just going to do what we did. Thank you for the assist Visual Studio. And now this is what we're going to be returning for this. So again, there could be a check for a null, but I'm not going to really go into the nitty gritty, just really trying to get these API endpoints working. And now quickly, just kind of skip ahead on this one. We are just going to go ahead and just copy this one in. So this is for delete. Delete, we are just going to try and find where the customer ID equals the ID that we're passing. Obviously, to go find that object that we're going to remove first through default async. We find it and then we remove it by doing a remove. And I believe you might have to save changes, so let me move that down here as well. And once you save your changes, you should be good to go, and we're just going to return true that it happened. We have finished coding our full repository, and now with that, we can see that our interface is here, and our interface is correctly injected into our controller. But what have we missed? We have missed everything to do with the startup of the program and configuring our services. So let's go do that, and then we will run our application, and then hit it with Postman so that we can actually check to make sure that all our endpoints are correctly working and data is being stored, edited, whatever. Like I mentioned, I had completely ignored the program or basically configuring services at the beginning. So I need to do that before our interface is going to work correctly or that connection with our database. So I need to add that in. So I'm going to add that in right here before the builder.build. We're going to quickly add in that we have our database here, our database connection, our sample DB, and our get connection string from our app settings. And then our builder services, we're going to add a scoped of our iCustomer repository and our customer repository. And for any of you that were paying attention and caught an error, I had forgot to put iCustomer repository right here, but we fixed that and now everything should be running smoothly. So now the next thing is we're going to hit the application with Postman so we can check all our endpoints. And let's just run the application quickly so we can see it build with Swagger. So we can see we have our endpoints all right here. They all look very cute. So now let's actually test them with Postman and see if we can create, edit, delete, and get, right? Let's do it. So like I promised, we are now going to hit our endpoints with Postman. I did have to make a few changes, so I want to walk you guys through the changes that I did have to make from the code that you guys had seen. So I did have to, when it came to the delete, I did have to add this route ID. It was confusing and it wasn't picking up the ID, so I added route ID, and then that started picking up the ID when I passed it in the URL. As well as I'm not going to get the prettiest decorator since I'm not actually going to like a front end sending back the OK. So I am going to have to tweak this a little bit. So let me tweak all these methods just so that Postman can give me like a nice result of what I'm returning, since I'm not actually sending this to a front end, which my mind always goes into quickly, what can I give to a front end? Okay with the result. But since we're just doing Postman, I kind of just want to quickly show you the results in Postman. And for that, I'm going to have to change what I'm returning. So I'm going to just quickly do that. Okay, so I'm back after the snap. The changes that I had to make is I just basically changed everything to its type instead of iAction result with OK returning to the front end. Since we don't really have a front end, we don't have how to make that pretty. So we're just going to straight up return like this to Postman so you guys can actually see the results of what we're getting and all that stuff correctly. So now we can actually go to Postman and test all this stuff while it is running. I do need to reload this one time so that we have all our current changes. Now that we are ready, this is running. Let us check. So in my database, I did create one entry called Bob. Bob should still be there. Let me just check. Customer ID 1, Bob is there. All right. So first thing we're going to do, we're just going to run a get. Get, you guys can see customer ID, Bob. We're getting the JSON back. Cool. Now let us try and edit Bob. We're going to try and name him Joe. Boom. Number 1 was edited. So now if we go back to the database, actually, let's not even go back to the database. Let's just pull again. Now customer name is Joe. So edit's working. Cool, cool, cool. Now let's try and post a new one. I'm just going to post myself here. Again, you are doing raw JSON. Let's post myself. ID number 4. So a number 4 was created. pull myself. Now you can see that we have a list of 2. Joe and myself are the customers. And then let's say I want to delete one. So now to delete one, customer 1 is who I want to delete. True. We correctly deleted one. And now if I get again, it should just be myself. So as you guys can see, we have created an API in .NET 6 using Entity Framework and a SQL database. And with Postman, I was able to prove that all my endpoints work. We have a CRUD REST API. And that is how you make all of that. And if obviously you wanted to grab these results and make them pretty, you would create some type of front-end application to actually show this data. And in that case, you would return okay with the result inside of it, so that the front end can then do what you need to do to show like the positive result. But for now, this is what we have. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please remember to drop a like and subscribe, especially if you enjoyed it and you find it helpful. And if you guys want to continue working on REST APIs, then check out this video right here where I show you guys how to unit test a REST API in .NET.